Hello and welcome to my talk on the move, mobilities and materialities in cruise tourism research at this year's Tourism and Leisure Studies conference. My name is Allegra Celine Baumann. I'm an urban sociologist and a research assistant and PhD student at TU Darmstadt. And I'm proud to present you my PhD project today. With my project, the aim is to link two fields of research, the research of infrastructures and tourism research. Lark says 2004 that technical infrastructure is the basis of the modern technological world. And Lukic et al. Say there is no modern city without technical infrastructure at its bottom. So we see that materialities like infrastructures are of huge importance for cities, modern cities, as well as for societies. And on the other side, we can say that we today are in the age of tourism, where tourism plays a major role for economies, but also for personal life, everyday life. And that means that the combination of materialities and mobilities, as tourism is part of mobilities, or is a certain type of mobilities, is of very high importance in our modern world. The starting point for my research is Susan Lee Starr's article, Ethnography of Infrastructure, in which she says that it's important to study the boring things, which they are infrastructure systems. Scott Cohen and Eric Cohen write in their article New Directions in the Sociology of Tourism that it's important to study obvious materialities such as cars and planes and cruise ships, and that mobilities are of higher importance in a modern world where everybody is mobile and everybody travels for work, for pleasure. And the third point, which is my starting point, is the research over tourism debate. The perceived negative effects of mass tourism, which are called overtourism, are today for a lot of cities which have an impact of tourism of high importance. In the overtourism debate, cruise tourism is often referred to as a symbol for overtourism. I think you all know the images, iconic somehow images of the big cruise ships in the front of the small ancient towns of Venice or buildings of Venice. So cruise tourism is often addressed as a symbol for overtourism. So I'm connecting infrastructure, tourism, and in particular cruise tourism in my research. The definition of the UNWTO about overtourism says that overtourism is the impact of tourism on a destination or parts thereof that excessively influences perceived quality of life of citizens and or the quality of visitors' experiences in a negative way. See that in a lot of different contexts. For example, in Barcelona, Venice, or Dubrovnik. And a lot of European destinations suffer from overtourism, which means that too many tourists are coming to these places and the local life changes as well as local structures. But also for the infrastructure, those masses of people that come to a city are a problem because the infrastructure is built for the citizens themselves and the carrying capacities are not able to cope with those many people. Hence, growing cruise tourism numbers have positive and negative impacts. The negative ones are referred to as overtourism. The problem or the problematic aspect of cruise tourism is that the cruise tourists and ships have a spatial and temporal concentration in a city. And with that, they have an impact on network technical infrastructures. That means that mobilities and materialities together form a very interesting subject because mobilities have an impact on materialities, even though they are very dependent on those materialities. And that is why critical infrastructures are of high relevance for my dissertation. Critical infrastructures, what is that? The city and its local community are highly dependent on critical infrastructure systems. Critical infrastructure systems, when we're talking about net-bound technical infrastructure systems, are water supply and sewage system, information and telecommunication systems, transportation and energy supply systems. Why are they critical? Because if they fail or if there's a breakdown, it can cause great damage for the society or even for a country, depending on how big the failure or breakdown is. On the other hand, they are also very important for tourism and especially for cruise tourism. Cruise tourism is highly dependent on those critical infrastructure systems provided by the city. For example, transportation, because cruise tourists in some destinations have to be transported from the port to the sightseeing attractions. On the other side, cruise tourism, as I said, creates a high pressure on critical infrastructure systems because, for example, the road system is not able or was not built for more people than the local community. With the problem of overtourism, local governments development strategies to cope with it. These strategies often address critical infrastructures. And now, that is the hypothesis of my dissertation, is that it depends which critical infrastructures are addressed in this context. This is depending on an ascription of criticality. So there's a process in which local governments or local authorities ascribe criticality, and in this process, prioritizing takes place. That means I want to research the process of ascribing criticality and its consequences. With that, I can make a contribution to better understanding of the decision-making of measures to cope with overtourism. My research design methods. My case study is Dubrovnik in Croatia. I chose Dubrovnik because it is, besides Venice and Barcelona, one of the most affected destinations in Europe, seaport destinations affected by tourism. In comparison to Venice and Barcelona, Dubrovnik is quite small, and the main sightseeing attraction is the old city, which is quite small and also surrounded by city walls, which means that the tourists really spatially concentrate in this area. For my research, I have a qualitative research design with semi-structured expert interviews, 32 in total, with port authorities, local authorities, infrastructure managers like road infrastructure, energy supply, water supply, as well as tourist guides, journalists, and activists. I also talked to the crew of a cruise ship, the captain, general manager, and shore excursions to see how they, from the ship side, what they define as critical in the infrastructure sector. Besides those semi-structured expert interviews, I did observations like photos and field notes, and I make a data analysis. Now I want to go in detail in my case study, Dubrovnik in Croatia. Here you can see a map of Europe, and as you see, Croatia has a very long coastline. Dubrovnik is in the south of Croatia, directly next to Montenegro and Bosnia-Herzegovina. It means it's an enclave surrounded by non-European Union borders. That means even if you want to go from central Croatia or from Split to Dubrovnik, you have to cross a non-European border, the one of Bosnia-Herzegovina. That means that is the reason why Dubrovnik has a very long shipping history and a very long cruise tourism history. Because in former times, lots of people arrived by ship because it was the best and easiest way of transportation. And even today, going by car takes longer. The airport doesn't have that many flights from different cities in the world. And by car, it takes a long time because there's no highway. That means that cruise tourism, even today, has a very high importance. Here you can see the old town surrounded by the city walls. As you can see, it is quite narrow and it is also not accessible by car. That means people have to go there by foot. And in the summer month during the high season, it is quite crowded because it has only 4 entrances and 2 main entrances. 2 of these 4 are main entrances to the city from east and west. And the main entrance is at Pila Gate, which is also a very important infrastructure node point. And at this entrance, you have a gate, the Pila Gate, through the city walls, and it is only accessible by a small amount of people at the same time, which means that in the high season, people queue up there. Here you can see the picture I took of the plane from Dubrovnik, and so you see again the old town in the front, and back there, I hope you can see, there is a small bridge on the left side, and there is Port Grouge. So it is in a small bay, the port, and on the next slide you will see the distance between those 2 points. So Port Grouge is the main port for cruise tourism. All the big vessels arrive there, embark and disembark there. There's also an anchorage place in the front of the old town, but the main cruise port is at Port Grouge. That means all the people who come by cruise ship have to be transported from Port Grouge to Pila Gate, which is approximately 3 kilometers. Mostly this happens by air shuttle buses, but some passengers also take taxis. Problematic in Dubrovnik is that it is a historical city, which means that also the infrastructure, the road infrastructure, is historical. On this plan, you see that a lot of streets are also one-way streets. That means that the way from the port, the fastest way from the port to the old city, there are limited alternatives, which means that during high arriving time, or during times where a lot of cruise ships arrive, it comes to traffic jams on these main roads to the city. This is the infrastructural node point at Pila, which I mentioned. And as you can see, taxis are arriving, air shuttle buses from the cruise ships arrive, shuttle buses from the airport arrive, and also the local bus transportation system is located there. So it's one of the main points, and because it's on this picture from the southern side, it's a one-way street, which means that all the traffic goes from this Pila Gate on the one road, which you see in the picture on the north side, goes there and back, at least in one direction. I would like to present you my first findings of my dissertation project, and start with a quote. The main problem is how to transport these people, the cruise passengers, from west to east across the city on a limited infrastructure. I derived this quote from an interview I conducted, and it states quite well that the transportation system, the road infrastructure, is ascribed as the most critical one in Dubrovnik, because the people have to be transported from the Port Grouge to the old town, means from west to east across the whole city on a limited infrastructure. The infrastructure is limited because it is an ancient city, historical city, so that means that road infrastructure cannot be widened that easily, or no new roads can be constructed. From my material, I derive that the description of criticality is based on failures. So first of all, the infrastructure system has to fail before it is ascribed as critical. In the case of road infrastructure, that means there were traffic jams before the local authorities were talking about how to cope with those problems. And we're saying that, like you can see in the quote, that the road infrastructure is the most critical one. The first finding I have from my dissertation is that the description of criticality takes place with a temporal delay and is motivated by extrinsic pressure. That means that after the infrastructure failed, for example, there were traffic jams on the main roads, and the road infrastructure failed, it took some time until measurements were taken, and those measurements by the local authorities, and those measurements were mostly motivated by extrinsic pressure. In the case of Dubrovnik is UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the UNESCO stated that there have to be some measurements done to cope with over-tourism. Otherwise, it could be problematic keeping the World Heritage status. This was the one extrinsic pressure. The other one was bad reputation in media in 2017, where it was published that Dubrovnik is one of the destinations not to visit in 2018. And this bad publicity, as well as the statements of the UNESCO, were the main trigger points for the local authorities to start to introduce measures how to cope with over-tourism. And for that, the first thing was to ascribe criticality. And as I said, the infrastructure that was ascribed as the most critical is the road infrastructure, with the two main critical nodes, which I already talked about: Port Gruž, the main cruise port, and Pile, the main infrastructural node point in front of the old city. The measurements by local authorities are based on this ascribed criticality. So they are short-term measures, which one example is, that at the critical node point, the one at Pile Gate or also at Port Gruž, human resources are used. So people stand there and help to regulate the traffic because the infrastructure itself can't handle it. This is a short-term measure which is quite flexible and quick to introduce in the case of an infrastructure failure or before the infrastructure fails. So it's kind of a prevention measure. And of course, the most important thing in regard to cruise tourism is the long-term measurement, the reduction and the spreading of cruise tourism, which means that Dubrovnik introduced a plan together with CLIA, the association of the cruise companies, that there should only be 4,000 cruise passengers at the same time, so 4,000 in the morning and 4,000 in the afternoon. And also the times of arrival and then of embarkation should be spread during the day, so that not all cruise ships arrive at the same time in the morning at 8, for example, but one arrives at 8, one at 9, and one at 10. So this is one long-term measure. It's a long-term measurement because of cruise itineraries are made in advance, which means it takes some years to implement this measurement in the long-term planning. Those are my first findings on the basis of my interviews, and the next step I will take is to look at which impact does this have for the local community. Because over-tourism, as I said in the beginning of my talk, is a perceived reduction in the quality of life. That means that the local community defines mass tourism or the masses of tourists and the consequences of this as a problem. So the question now is, by the way, local authorities ascribe criticality and the measures which are based on this ascribed criticality, what impact does this have for the local community? And hopefully I will be able to present the results and all the findings of my dissertation next year at the conference, which will then take place in Dubrovnik. So concluding, talking about materialities and mobilities, I can say that to consider materialities like critical infrastructures adds new perspectives to the discussion of measurements to cope with over-tourism. So it is really useful and important and can derive new findings to combine the materialities and mobilities, to combine infrastructure and tourism, and to frame it in a sociological context. Thank you very much for your attention. Here you can find on the slide again my name and the research training school I'm part of. And if you have any comments or anything, feedback to my research project, then I would be more than happy to get in contact with you. You can find my email address here. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a nice and wonderful day and rest of the conference. And I'm looking forward to meet you next year in Dubrovnik and to present my dissertation, which is about Dubrovnik, then in this wonderful city. Thank you very much, and goodbye.